Masked crusaders working overtime, fighting crime. Secret raiders who will neutralize soon as they arrive. And Spectrum's got such supervision. Is the mighty power they can save the day. No one knows what lies behind their mask charade.
Listen up, because I'm about to tell you about one of the most ambitious toy lines of the 1980s that made millions of dollars and then completely vanished. I'm talking about M.A.S.K, Mobile Armored Strike Command. And no, not the Jim Carrey movie. That's a completely different thing. And honestly, that confusion has plagued this franchise for decades. Now, if you grew up in the mid-80s, you probably remember these incredible transforming vehicles. A Camaro that turned into a jet fighter, a motorcycle that became a helicopter. These weren't just toys. They were engineering marvels that cost a fortune to produce. But here's the thing most people don't know. M.A.S.K wasn't some creative passion project. It was a calculated corporate strategy by Kenner to fill a massive financial hole left by the end of Star Wars. They literally engineered this franchise to be the perfect hybrid of G.I. Joe and Transformers. And that decision, that seemingly brilliant strategy of combining the best elements of two juggernauts, is exactly what killed it. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why M.A.S.K rose so fast, fell so hard, and why it's making a comeback in 2025. But first, let me show you just how massive this franchise was at its peak. Part 1. The desperate birth of M.A.S.K. So picture this. It's 1985, and Kenner is in full panic mode. For years, they'd been printing money with Star Wars action figures. I mean, we're talking about one of the most profitable toy lines in history. Every kid in America had at least a few Star Wars figures, and the serious collectors had hundreds. But by the mid-80s, that gravy train was coming to an end. Return of the Jedi had wrapped up, and while the movies were still beloved, kids were moving on. The toy sales were declining, and Kenner was staring down a massive revenue vacuum. Meanwhile, their main competitor Hasbro was absolutely dominating with two massive hits, G.I. Joe and Transformers. These weren't just successful toys, they were cultural phenomena. Every kid in America wanted either a 3.75-inch Joe figure or a robot that turned into a car. So Kenner's executives sat down and basically said, what if we just combined them? And that's exactly what they did. They invested what they called a ton of development money into creating M.A.S.K. The concept was brilliant on paper. Take the smaller, more affordable action figure scale from G.I. Joe, but give them the transformation gimmick that made Transformers so addictive. The premise they came up with was pretty straightforward. Wealthy philanthropist Matt Trakker leads this secret task force called M.A.S.K against a terrorist organization called Venom, which stands for Vicious Evil Network of Mayhem. I mean, come on, that's an 80s villain name, if I've ever heard one. The leader of Venom was Miles Mayhem, a former ally turned evil tyrant. Classic betrayal storyline. And here's what made M.A.S.K special. Every vehicle looked like a normal car or truck, your everyday street ride. But then it would transform to reveal hidden weapons and armor. The heroes had these secret identities where their vehicles could blend in with regular traffic. And then bam, they'd transform into battle machines. Each pilot wore a mask that supposedly gave them superpowers. The engineering was legitimately impressive. These weren't cheap toys. They had rubber tires, chrome details, spring-loaded auto-transformation mechanisms. Some even had licensed real vehicle brands on the tires. Kenner went all in on quality, which is both why these toys were so cool and why they ultimately couldn't compete on price. Now, when M.A.S.K launched in September 1985, everything aligned perfectly. And I mean perfectly. The animated series debuted at the exact same time as the toys hit shelves. This wasn't an accident. This was calculated media synchronization at its finest. And they didn't just make a few episodes to test the waters. No, they went all in with 65 episodes in the first season. Why 65? Because as I've said in previous videos, that's the magic number for syndication. With 65 episodes, TV stations could strip the show, meaning they could air it 5 days a week for 13 weeks straight. Your kid would come home from school every single day and see M.A.S.K on TV. That's how you build brand awareness. The show itself was pure 80s action. Every episode followed the same formula. Venom would hatch some crazy scheme, stealing military plutonium for an earthquake machine, hypnotizing people through television to hijack a powerful laser, using deadly blue slime for something nefarious. The plots were wild, over the top, and exactly what we wanted as kids. They called it the crime of the week format. And while it was great for selling toys, it meant the show never really developed deep characters or complex storylines. But honestly, we didn't care. We just wanted to see Thunderhawk transform from a Camaro into a jet. The toy line was equally impressive. Series 1 launched with the core vehicles: Condor, Firecracker, Gator, Rhino, Thunderhawk, Jackhammer, Piranha, and Switchblade. These names are probably burned into your memory if you owned any of them. And Kenner was smart about the packaging. The boxes were windowless, which was unusual. But inside, you'd find mini comics, calendars, or product catalogs. It was like getting a bonus with every purchase. And those catalogs? They were basically wish lists that made you want to collect them all. By the end of 1985, M.A.S.K was a legitimate hit. DC Comics launched a 4-part miniseries in December, which expanded into a 9-issue second series that ran until October 1987. Series 2 toys were already in development with adventure packs and figure 2-packs. The brand had momentum, and Kenner thought they'd found their Star Wars replacement. But they were about to make one of the biggest strategic blunders in toy history. Part 2, the racing pivot that killed everything. Okay, so this is where everything falls apart. And I mean everything. After that successful 65-episode first season, someone at Kenner or DIC Entertainment had what they thought was a brilliant idea. What if we made Season 2 about racing instead of counterterrorism? I'm not kidding. They completely abandoned the espionage and action premise that made the show work and pivoted to auto racing. The entire theme of the series fundamentally shifted. Now, think about this for a second. The whole point of M.A.S.K was that these vehicles had hidden weapons and could transform for tactical advantages in combat. A car becoming a jet makes perfect sense when you're fighting terrorists. A motorcycle becoming a helicopter is perfect for stealth missions. But in a race, what are you going to do? Transform mid-race and fly to the finish line? That's not racing, that's cheating. The entire logical foundation of the transformation gimmick became meaningless, and the audience immediately rejected it. Season 2 lasted exactly 10 episodes. Just a measly 10. It ran from September to November 1986, and then got canceled. The show that had 65 episodes in its first season couldn't even make it through a full quarter with this new format. One industry observer put it perfectly. The shift from fighting terrorism into race car driving was the exact point where the show and the toys began to fade from popularity. But here's the really crazy part. Even though the cartoon got canceled in late 1986, Kenner kept making toys for 2 more years. They were committed to the racing theme for Series 3 in 1987, which means they'd already manufactured all these racing-focused toys for a show that no longer existed. Can you imagine being a kid in 1987, seeing these new M.A.S.K racing toys in stores, but having no cartoon to watch? No context for why these characters were racing instead of fighting. And then, in what I can only describe as an act of desperation, they launched Series 4 in 1987 called Split Seconds. These were vehicles that literally split into 2 pieces and featured transparent figures that were supposed to represent holograms. Let me repeat that. They made hologram figures for a show that had been off the air for a full year. This was Kenner trying to replace narrative momentum with increasingly complex and expensive gimmicks. They were doubling down on engineering when what they really needed was the cartoon to sell the story. By 1988, it was over. The original Kenner M.A.S.K toy line ceased production. A franchise that had seemed unstoppable just 3 years earlier was dead. And the cause of death? A single catastrophic creative decision that destroyed the media support the toys desperately needed. But even if they hadn't made that racing pivot, M.A.S.K had a fundamental problem that would have caught up with it eventually. See, M.A.S.K suffered from what I call the Goldilocks problem. It was trying to be 2 things at once, and it ended up being too expensive for one market and too limited for the other. Let me explain. G.I. Joe succeeded because the figures were cheap. You could buy a basic Joe for a few bucks, which meant kids could build entire armies. You could have 10 good guys fighting 10 bad guys, and it didn't break the bank. That's a great play pattern. Transformers succeeded because even though the figures were more expensive, each one was a complete, iconic character. Optimus Prime was Optimus Prime. You didn't need 10 of him. The higher price point was justified by the complexity and the character's importance. M.A.S.K tried to split the difference. The figures were small and cheap like G.I. Joe, but they were useless without their vehicles. And those vehicles had all the complex engineering of Transformers, which made them expensive. So you had the worst of both worlds. You needed to buy expensive vehicles to make the cheap figures work, but you couldn't build a big collection because each purchase was costly. And there was another problem. The story itself was too narrow. Transformers had this epic, cosmic war between Autobots and Decepticons that could go anywhere and introduce endless new characters. G.I. Joe had an entire military structure with specialized roles. You could always add a new type of soldier or vehicle. But M.A.S.K? It was just a specialized counterterrorism unit fighting one rogue organization. There wasn't much room to expand the mythology, and after they killed the show with the racing pivot, the toys had no story at all. When you compare M.A.S.K to its competitors, the disadvantages become obvious. It cost too much to collect like G.I. Joe, but it didn't have the iconic characters of Transformers. It had complex engineering, but no media support. It was stuck in the middle, and in the toy wars of the 1980s, the middle was a death sentence. Part 3, the cult legacy and the 2025 comeback. But here's the thing about M.A.S.K. It never really died. Despite everything I just told you, M.A.S.K has maintained a dedicated cult following for almost 40 years. Those original Kenner toys still pop up in storage lots and get sold for loads of money. There's a reason for that. The engineering was genuinely impressive, and the vehicle designs were unique, and that nostalgia has real value. Hasbro, which now owns the M.A.S.K IP, has been trying to bring it back for years. They've had a live-action movie in development with Paramount Pictures. F. Gary Gray, who directed The Fate of the Furious, was attached to direct. Chris Bremner from Bad Boys for Life was writing the script. The goal? To create what they call a contemporary subculture movie with a youth empowerment angle. They're trying to update the concept for modern audiences while keeping the transforming vehicle hook that made it special. But the really interesting news is the toy relaunch. In September 2024, Hasbro signed a deal with a company called The Loyal Subjects to bring M.A.S.K toys back to market. And they're not messing around. The first wave dropped in July 2025. They're re-engineering the iconic Series 1 vehicles: Thunderhawk, Switchblade, Rhino, and Condor. They're staying true to the original scale and aesthetic, but with modern enhancements. Here's the smart part. They're not trying to compete in the mass market against today's toy giants. Instead, they're targeting collectors. The Thunderhawk, that iconic Camaro that transforms into a jet, is priced at $65. The limited edition Rhino Mobile Defense Unit is $175. This is a premium, nostalgia-driven strategy. They're turning what was once a liability, the expensive, complex engineering, into a selling point for adult collectors who remember these toys from childhood. It's a low-risk way to test if there's still a market for M.A.S.K, and honestly, I think it's going to work. So what's the lesson here? M.A.S.K rose because Kenner made a calculated bet on combining the best elements of the two biggest toy franchises of the era. They invested heavily in quality engineering and media synchronization, and for about a year, it worked beautifully. But M.A.S.K fell because of one catastrophic creative decision. That racing pivot in Season 2 destroyed the logical foundation of the entire franchise. Without the show to support the toys, and with a price point that couldn't compete with cheaper alternatives, the line collapsed. The real tragedy is that M.A.S.K didn't fail because it was bad. It failed because someone made a terrible strategic choice at exactly the wrong time. In the hyper-competitive toy market of the 1980s, one mistake was all it took. And yet, here we are in 2025, and M.A.S.K is coming back. Because good ideas don't really die. They just wait for the right moment to transform and reveal their hidden potential. Kind of like a Camaro turning into a jet fighter. Thanks for watching, everyone. But here's the thing. M.A.S.K wasn't the only 80s toy line that crashed and burned in spectacular fashion. If you want to know about another franchise that went from hero to zero, check out this video right here where I break down exactly what went wrong. And if you grew up with M.A.S.K, drop a comment and let me know which vehicle you had. I'm betting most of you had Thunderhawk. That Camaro was everywhere. But if you had Switchblade or one of the rarer vehicles, I want to hear about it. Hit that subscribe button if you want more deep dives into 80s pop culture and the business decisions that shaped our childhoods. See you in the next one.